There we go. Sound now. Now there's sound. Every bloody time. Every bloody time. This is bullshit. How many times have I done this and I've fucked up the sound? Oh, I need my coffee. So you can hear me now? Yeah, there we go. So guys, thank you for letting me know. That was a test. That was a test to make sure you're watching. It's all a test. It's all planned. This isn't just some honky-donk operation here. I'm just running out of nowhere. But there's about a 30-second delay with the YouTube. One thing, if you want to get your comments up on screen, there's two ways you can do it. You can leave your comments on YouTube, or you can use the hashtag. You can use the hashtag. How is the noise? Is it too loud, guys? Do I need to adjust the mic there? Is that too loud, or yes, all good? Too much sound, Francis. Are you just shitting with me, mate? Just screwing with me? I can't tell anymore. So guys, use this hashtag if you want to get it on Twitter. So if you're talking about other stuff, you know, like sharing your frustrations with this cash ban, whack that hashtag on it. Now, what I'm doing is, what we'll do today, I recorded this. I recorded the government footage, and so I'll be playing it on my desktop. So I need you to let me know if the sound is okay here as well, because I'm not doing anything advanced and equalizing it. I'm just moving a thing up and down. Okay, so all good. So you all got your steins ready? Cheers. Ah, yeah, Francis is joking. Thanks. Good work, buddy. Okay, cheers, let's go. And let me know how the sound is on the video to make sure it's not too quiet. Howler is...
Tuition protection levy and for related purposes.
Screwing me.
The clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 4. Currency restrictions on the use of Cash Bill 2019. Resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Call the member for Whitlam.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I move the amendment which has been circulated in my name. Speaker, this bill establishes a cash payment limit and introduces offences for entities that make
I put
or
up with it,
accept
mate,
cash
for you guys.
payments of $10,000 or more from 1 January 2020. Now, offences under the new provision would carry a maximum penalty of $25,000 or 2 years imprisonment for individuals or businesses which recklessly break the cash limit. These offences can apply whether the individual is a recipient or a payee of the cash value.
So we're all screwed. We're all screwed. If you get the money or you spend your own fucking money.
Now, the bill follows on from the 2018 report of the government's Black Economy Task Force, which found that large cash payments can be anonymous and untraceable, allowing businesses to underreport their income and to offer consumers discounts for transactions that reflect the business's avoided obligations. It is also found that the bill can be a vehicle for, that the cash economy is a vehicle for money laundering.
A vehicle for money laundering. Are they going to kind of shut down the entire property sector then with all the foreign money laundered in Australia, guys? What do you reckon?
The bill does include the power to make exceptions to the cash payment limit through a legislative instrument made by the relevant minister. I understand that the government's draft rules, which are not a part of the bill, but the draft rules would exempt the following types of payments. Firstly, payments related to personal or private transactions, for example, purchasing a motor vehicle off somebody in your neighbourhood. Secondly, payments that must be reported by an entity under the anti-money
Can't make
laundering
multiple
and
transactions,
counter-terrorism legislation, provided broadly the entity with a reporting obligation complies with their obligations under that legislation. The third exemption under the draft rules would apply to payments made or accepted by a public official in which the public official is legally required to make or accept a cash payment in the course of their duties. The fourth exemption would apply to payments that only exceed the cash payment limit because the payment is part of a transaction involving collecting, holding or delivering cash that is undertaken in the course of an enterprise of collecting or delivering cash. Deputy Speaker, and that seems to be an obvious one as well. And the fifth exemption would be payments that only exceed the cash payment limit because the payment is or includes an amount of digital currency. Deputy Speaker, the rules also provide, or the draft rules also provide to exempt payments that occur in situations where no alternative method of payment could be reasonably used, although I do make the point that it is unclear whether this would apply as an exemption or a defence to an offence arising under the legislation.
That's a good point. If it's a defence, if you have to go to court to fight it, what do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen? Yeah, and Dupkek is going, yeah, bribes, probably Aldi bags are exempt. Yeah, the big fella. Yep. Digital currencies as well. There as well, they're caught in it. And thank you very much, my friend, for the super chat. I appreciate it.
A matter that requires further interrogation.
You still can spend the cash.
Future rules could exempt other types of payments or be changed to remove exemptions for types of payments. Now, Deputy Speaker, there has been a lot of concern within the community about the impact of this bill. There wouldn't be a member in this House who hasn't received representations from constituents.
Everyone, you can raise your steins to that one. At the very least, they're aware that we are all frustrated and angry. And good work with the CEC, Adams, North, everyone who's talked about this. Raise your steins.
In relation to it. Now, to facilitate the orderly interrogation of those concerns and the swift passage of this bill to the Senate, where it may be further interrogated and investigated, Labor won't be opposing the bill in the House. But we have been working with the crossbenchers to ensure that there is a rigorous examination of the provisions of the bill in the Senate to ensure that all of the community concerns that have been raised with Labor, and presumably with the crossbenchers as well, are thoroughly ventilated, investigated and dealt with. A significant provision, significant penalties. We want to ensure that there are no unintended consequences and that those community concerns can be dealt with. Deputy Speaker, while the tap and go phenomena, which I must confess I've adopted, is an amazing convenience, we do recognise that cash remains a favoured medium of transaction.
What about the CommBank going down a couple of days ago and all the people that couldn't spend money? I mean, come on, guys.
For many law-abiding members of the Australian community, those in small business, pensioners and retirees,
I'll have a talk about crypto.
Members of Australia's diverse multicultural
look up Superman's latest
communities,
video, big fella.
Deputy Speaker, have an attachment to cash and using cash for their everyday transactions. Older Australians use cash for more than half of their payments. Deputy Speaker, Australians in the lowest quartile, the lowest income quartile, use cash for more than 40% of all of their payments. We recognise their concerns and the concerns of the communities.
So they're gonna hit the poorest people, the proles. That's what they're gonna squeeze more tax out of them. Bloody hell.
As being worthy of further consideration. This is why we have worked with the crossbench on ensuring that we can investigate, hopefully allay those concerns that have been raised. Deputy Speaker, it is important to understand why Australians have these concerns with the government's proposed cash transaction ban, and it's why I'm moving an amendment at the second reading stage of the bill's consideration. Because the fact is, the truth of the matter is that Australians have no faith in this government's capacity to manage the economic problems that the country is facing right now. And they certainly have no faith in the government's ability to manage those problems in the interests of ordinary everyday Australians. The Morrison government quite simply has a plan for a slogan. It's got a political plan, but to coin a phrase, Deputy Speaker, an economic plan, where the bloody hell are you? No plan for the country when it comes to managing economic growth, managing the parlous state of wage increases. Economic growth, lowest rate since the global financial crisis. The economy is struggling. The government loves to blame every problem on somebody else, whether it's economic headwinds or labour. Somebody else is always the fault. Somebody else is always the cause of the problem, not their own parlous state of economic management. Deputy Speaker, our economy is struggling, but the New Zealand economy just across the ditch is growing at nearly twice the pace of ours.
Criminals
no
won't break the law, you're
Australian
right.
ever likes to be beaten by a Kiwi in anything.
The New Zealand economy is growing. Okay, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see how their export economy of milk products goes.
And while the Kiwis race ahead, Australian household living standards have declined under the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison disaster show. Real household median income is lower now than it was in 2013. Wages are growing at the lowest rate since record keeping began. We've got 1.9 million Australians who are either looking for work or looking for more work because they are underemployed.
Yeah, because businesses have to pay so much bloody tax to you, mob. That's why. Come on.
Investment is down 20% since the Liberals came to office and is now at its lowest level since the 1990s recession. Consumer confidence and consumption growth are incredibly weak. Weak growth like this is the inevitable result of a government with a political strategy but no economic plan. And what's the government's answer to the challenges which the Australian economy is facing? Quite simply, Deputy Speaker, it's silence.
Hey Kathy, thank you very much for the super chat and for bringing up the pink bat. Yeah, that was horrific. Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
No plan to get business investment moving. No plan to deal with the deepening drought. In fact, we've seen the National Party backroom revolt going on, entirely politically motivated. They're more concerned about their own political future than they are of the future of drought-riven communities. More concerned about who takes credit for the woeful policies than what's going on in those communities that they represent, Deputy Speaker. No plan to deal with this at all. A lot of noise, but no plan. Instead, the Coalition has one answer and one answer only, and that is to continue with their current strategy, which is doing nothing, which means flat growth, flat wages and a decline in confidence.
Sometimes doing nothing is the best thing a government can do, to be honest. I mean, you know, it could get worse, guys. There could be worse things than doing nothing.
Deputy Speaker, it is no wonder that members of the public are rightfully concerned when they see legislation such as this. They are saying, what is the real agenda here? What's going on? Why is the government introducing this bill when they haven't dealt with any of these other issues which are affecting the well-being at the household level.
I can tell you, they want more tax. That's it. That's the point. Tax. Yep.
Speaker. And I do want to say one other thing about the government's, not only the management of the economy, but management of the business before this House. Because, as I said at the outset, this bill was in part a response to the Black Economy Task Force. A recommendation of that task force about restricting the use of cash, which could then lead to tax avoidance or lead to money laundering activities. Deputy Speaker, if only the government was so active in introducing and paying attention to all of the recommendations of the Black Economy Task Force. Because a very, very important recommendation of the Black Economy Task Force was dealing with anti-phoenixing activity. Anti-phoenixing activity where
Thanks for the super chat, mate. And yep, the bank bail-in. That's the end game. I don't know. I think negative interest rates. I still think it's tax. Number one. I don't think they're thinking that far ahead. I think other people are, not our glorious leaders.
A business or a set of directors deliberately send a business into liquidation, strip or transfer the assets from that business to another business, leave the creditors stranded, whether they're tradies or small businesses. So the member for Kennedy agreeing me on this point, with this point at least, and he would know about this. I'm sure that there are thousands of small businesses, tradies, creditors in his electorate who have been impacted by this. We know that the cost of the economy as a whole is about $5 billion per annum. About $5 billion per annum. The cost of small businesses, the cost of creditors, about $3 billion per annum. That is a small business.
Look at that. Look at that. Look at that, guys. It's empty. It's bloody empty.
Each and every year going to the wall because of the unconscionable phoenixing behaviour of...
You think you think our politicians are cunning and sly? Are you kidding? Not the politicians. There are other people that are, not the pollies. Come on, mate. Half of them probably haven't even read any of the stuff that's put in front of them. And they just watch. They're not even here. They'll just walk from one side of the room to the other, and that's how they earn their paycheck.
Dodgy directors who time and time again blow their company up, move on down the road, slightly different name, new ABN, maybe it's the same director number, maybe they put their dog down as the director of the new company. That's possible, Deputy Speaker. And the government persists on doing nothing. We had some hope. We had some hope when we saw legislation addressing the Black Economy Task Force on the forward notice paper that they were actually going to do something about this. But, Deputy Speaker, hope forlorn. They've actually pulled from the agenda this week the legislation purporting to deal with anti-phoenixing.
Yeah, Ron, I agree with you, mate. We need to get more diversity in the House of Reps as well as the Senate. We need to shift the window. Definitely. People need to learn that they can't waste their vote. That's the issue. Oh, yeah. And Kathy, what? Is someone flicking through Facebook on... Oh, shit, you're right.
And we have to ask why.
Business.
Why has the government, after having received and sat on the Black Economy Task Force report for so long, abandoned all hope for those small business who are being left high and dry by dodgy directors and by this government, which can't manage its business and can't manage the legislation before the House. So it is now the case, Deputy Speaker, that we will have to wait until at least next year. We will have to wait until at least next year, before we get some feeble legislation from this government to address the problem of anti-phoenixing in this country. Months of delays, months of unpaid bills to creditors, months of small businesses going to the wall because they've taken no action against these dodgy developers.
Yeah, he makes some good points there. You know?
So if we're going to have legislation before the House which deals with the implementation of the Black Economy Task Force, let's deal with all of the problems, Deputy Speaker. Let's deal with all of the problems. Not just picking it one by one. Let's deal with all of the problems, and let's ensure that we provide some relief to those small businesses that are being driven to the wall. And if only the government and this hapless Assistant Treasurer could manage their business, perhaps get a bit more influence with inside their show, we'd have some proper legislation before the House to deal with this issue. We did learn last night in Senate estimates that introducing director identification numbers, which of course is the real key in this. Every Australian has a tax file number. The real key to ensuring that we crack down on dodgy developers and illegal phoenixing is putting in place a system of director identification numbers. And when we...
Director identification numbers. I've heard about this, so I want to look at it a bit more, but... oh, bloody hell. Another bit of legislation, another number, another way to track people, another bit of bureaucracy. He's going all over the place, isn't he?
Quizzed the government through Senator Hume in Senate estimates last night. They admitted that this was still a priority for government, but obviously not a priority for the Assistant Minister, or it's a priority in name only. Legislation has been pulled on the matter, and we are yet to see legislation in this term of government to deal with director ID numbers. So we're right to be sceptical about the bill before the House today. The community is right to have some concerns.
Else, Paul. Another
which
thing.
Is why, Deputy Speaker, we'll be referring this matter to a Senate inquiry, and those members of the community who have concerns, we invite them to make submissions to that Senate inquiry to ensure that all of those concerns can be adequately dealt with.
I thank the member for Whitlam. Is the amendment seconded? I call the member for Rankin.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I second the amendment and reserve my right to speak.
I thank the member for Rankin. The original question was that this bill be now read a second time. To this, the honourable member for Whitlam has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view substituting other words. The question now is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Kennedy.
Speaker, I commend the previous speaker. A lot of what he said is very relevant to what we're discussing here today. I don't know whether the schools still have compulsory reading of 1984 and Brave New World, but the idea that Big Brother is watching...
Right, raise your stein if you had to read 1984 at school, guys. I cheated, I watched the movie and wrote the book review of that. Smash up the likes if you cheated like me.
And that you have no right to privacy. They were both profoundly scary books, and they were meant by the people that wrote them to be scary books. Big Brother is watching you all of the time. In China, one of the ugliest communities on earth, there is a camera for every 3 people, and the cameras have an ability to face identify. So Big Brother is with us in at least one country on earth, and it happens to be the biggest country on earth. Speaker, if ever I've seen Big Brother is watching legislation, this most certainly is it. Now, it is particularly relevant in one of the industries that I come from. I've had cattle all of my life. But when the banks take you from 6.5% to 29%...
Big fella's raising a point here. He didn't like Katter until his speech. In some ways, you don't really get to see a lot of the politicians or the true side of them just in the media with the bits we get here and there. You know? It's just the way it is. The media will drive a narrative. It's why they always paint Hanson as a wrong. Till you hear their own words. You hear their own words.
and I have no ability to protect myself, then I think I am entitled, because the law forces that upon me, that I'm entitled to dodge the law. And I would say many of my brother cattlemen, I would put that figure at maybe 25 or 30%, when the banks start screwing them. And I repeat the figures. And I know the figures because I was a person that borrowed at 6.5%, and the year before we sold the St Francis.
Just think about his story he's saying here, guys. Just think that their 6.5% was cheap, was low interest rates. You know, think about that.
Station blocks, I was paying 29%, and I can assure you I was not Robinson Crusoe. The banks just take it upon themselves. You've signed a document, which is not a contract. There's no obligations on the bank's part, as Henry Bourne Higgins, one of the great jurists of this nation's history, said to the courts. A contract made by a single person is not a contract. So, I mean, you sign a document with the banks and it says they can do anything to you anytime they like, and you have no rights to do anything to them at all. So they can simply take you up through huge interest rates. In the infamous case, which probably had about 8 or 9 million hits on the internet, the Charlie Follott case, one of the great Australians, Charles Follott. In that case, he had kept his interest and repayments. He thought he had a contract. And if I keep my interest and repayments going, and he went hungry to keep his interest and repayments going. He lived in grinding poverty because he's a very honourable man, a very God-fearing man, a man that says his prayers in the morning and the evening every day of his life. And he felt that if he had a contract, he had to fulfil it. So he fulfilled what he thought was contract, but of course there was no contract. There's a contract with one person, not two people. So by definition, it wasn't a contract.
He's talking about a farmer who lost everything because the banks just changed the rules on him. Changed the rules on him. Just shows you how the banks can screw you around pretty much. And now we're pretty much going to be stuck in that system.
But he kept what he said was his side of it, and the banks just said, well, we don't think that you've got any hope pulling through, or the banks thought your equity is lower than we want your equity to be now, so we're just going to sell you up, which they proceeded to do, Mr. Speaker. A case so notorious that it was run twice.
Yeah, stop just repeating the same thing, bad, not good, mate.
Massive nationwide publicity. As I said, maybe 7 or 8 million hits by the time.
There you go. It's not for the chamber, is it? It's for us.
It had run its race. The famous letter by David Pascoe to my fellow Australians, which had a picture of Charlie Follott at the top of the page. But what a cattleman does, what he can do, is to sneak a few head away and sell them, put the cash in his pocket where it can't be found, and he might have some ability to survive and repay the banks. Because he's still got the debt with the banks, of course. But they can't see his ability to survive. But if the stories, the legendary stories I know, family that is the biggest cattle owning family in Australia, got their start doing exactly what I just described.
Just think about that as well. They want you to go pay the tax man before you pay for a house for your family or food for your family. Just think about
that. During the Great Depression, they lived up in the mountains. First
Good
Australian
idea, pub.
and Ringer, and and a lady, and she took the cattle up in the mountains in North Queensland where they couldn't be found, and traded by cash. The biggest private drilling operator in Australia, again, traded by cash when they were foreclosing on him in the collapse of the mining industry. But when we were desperately chasing drillers, when the mining boom came again, thank the good Lord, he was there. And he had a number of drills and could start the programs around Charters Towers that created 5 of our mines around Charters Towers, which were bringing in nearly $2,500 million a year into the Australian economy.
It's a good point, French. General public have no idea. Whenever I buy a 7-Eleven coffee, I ask the clerk about the $10,000 cash ban. They don't know what I'm talking about. Every time.
And created 2,000 jobs. So whether it's our cattlemen or whether it's our mining drillers or 1,000 other groups of people, I'll give another example. A hotel, and deeply in debt through no fault of their own. The government closed down the wool industry, the government closed down the railways, and the town in which they had the hotels, of course, had no income at all. There was nothing left, where you had maybe 5 or 6 sheep stations supporting maybe 10 shearers in the town. You know, there was 1 cattle station and no shearers. Cattle stations don't need labour. Really, a husband and wife can run a very, very big cattle station by themselves. Or 6 or 7 sheep stations converted to cattle stations they could run by themselves. So I'll give you a case of the driller. I've given you a case of the hotelier.
We all know a famous hotelier that went to Parliament, didn't we?
He survived, 2 industries came to the town, and we were able to base the workforce in that town and therefore provide prosperity for that town that had been massacred by the ALP decision to deregulate the wool industry and by the ALP decision to sell off the railways in Queensland. And I'm not saying the other side, if they'd have been there, they'd have done both, in my opinion. Just so happened they weren't there, that's all.
That's a good point. There's very little difference between the two sides, the two majors. There's hardly any difference, guys. Don't put all your hopes in, like, if you're a die-hard Labour guy, don't put your hopes in one party. We need diversity. You need a mix. You need characters like Katter in there. Even if you don't like them, you want them in there. You want a mix.
Now, we constantly have the police force wanting to make life easier for themselves. And heaven only knows they have a hard job to do. Who could blame them? But the government is there to protect the rights of the people. Now, going back to the grim and horrifying spectres that were put there by George Orwell and 19...
Don't worry, Crunchy. Just go and buy your cattle with cash, mate, while you can. It'll be good. Cashy.
In 1984 and in Brave New World, those Orwellian spectres. Well, can you imagine a society in which the only people that are allowed to have guns are the people in uniforms? Now, every intelligent group of people that have sat down in human history, Stephen Langton, and William Marshall, that drew up the Magna Carta. Quote John F. Kennedy, when he had all of the Nobel Prize winners, he said, "This is the greatest aggregation of intellect that the White House has ever seen, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone." Who's one of the great intellects of human history, Thomas Jefferson. And he was primarily responsible for drawing up the Bill of Rights. So every time men have sat down, they have realised the grave dangers of having a society in which the only person allowed to have arms are the people in uniforms. the government people, the King's people, whatever. The other terrible part of this bill is, and I back up the previous speaker very strongly on the Phoenix cases. The Sydney Morning Herald delineated 14 major cases, and in each of those cases, ASIC or APRA should have been involved. There was the notorious case of the sugarcane mill at Innisfail. We allocate $1 million, $100 for every million tonne of cane. So if it's 2 million tonne mill, as this was, it's worth 200 million. Well, it was sold out from under the farmers for $2 million. $2 million. And I can't go into the details of the case here today, but the person who bought it was the person who had offered 57 million the year before. Now, through a nice little cosy arrangement with the liquidators, they got it for $2 million. So they offered $57 million the year before, and with a nice cosy little arrangement, they got it for $2 million. And the farmers lost $200 million. Now, to provide further proof of what is going on, that sugar mill was sold 2 years later for $76 million. I'm sure it would have been sold for $150 million, except for the fact that they'd have probably gone to jail. I mean, that would have been so outrageous that maybe then and only then they would have gone to jail. But no one went to jail. We know what the value of the mill was. We know what it was sold for. We know the dirty dealings that went behind the scenes. Now, this is the point. There are people paid nearly $500,000 in salaries at APRA and ASIC. In the case of the sugar mill, the then Treasurer, Wayne Swan, was so enraged that he took a risk, because it is a risk. You can be argued that you're interfering in the course of justice. But it's his duty to see that justice is done. And he insisted that ASIC meet with the representatives of the farmers. Not...
Well, this is new to me, hearing about this. I want to look into it more. But having to put pressure on ASIC to pull their finger out for anything is no surprise at all.
Not once, but 3 times he ordered them. And they completely defied him and ignored him. Well, if I was to criticise Wayne, and I think he's one of the finest treasurers since the Second World War, history books will record that. But in this case, he sort of ruthlessly and brutally sacked them. And if I had been in his place, they would have been ruthlessly and brutally sacked. And anyone knows that my reputation, when I was minister, the second ranking minister actually, when the government fell, there was no doubt that if you defied justice and those principles that we have to protect people, ordinary people, if you defied those principles, your lazy stupidity and your callous disregard, then we would get you. And we did. Not only me, but other ministers in that wonderful, much maligned Bajocki-Peterson government. By the way, I just mentioned in passing, because we're talking about legal things here, that he died penniless, did not have 2 bob to rub together. Only 2 members of Parliament since the Second World War have refused to take their superannuation because they believed it was the wrong thing to do. He was one of them. Here he is penniless, and he refuses to take his superannuation. And I know, because I was the person designated by Cabinet to plead with him to take something, because his family was destitute. Never took a free cup of tea for himself. And interestingly, easily the most important person in Australian history.
Stay on topic, Bob. I think you're asking a bit much there, Innocent. Come on, it's part of the entertainment. Part of the entertainment.
And we're talking about laws and justice here. As Edward Granville Theodore, not my comment, Paul Keating's comment, the greatest man in Australian history. Not my comment, Malcolm Fraser's comment. See, the Liberal Prime Minister described him. He was in partnership, and his closest, and they were very close friends, was Clyde Packer, and they formed the Consolidated Press together. But he was founder of the Labor movement in Australia when it was a very great movement.
Thanks,
we were
Luke. Appreciate it, mate.
Associated with it in those days. But
Go get yourself a Bose.
in the history books, he's referred to by the Mungana scandal. Like he's some crook. He's the greatest man in Australian history. Anyway, we set that aside. But these criminals, which the previous Labor Speaker referred to, they get away with anything they wanted to. Oh yeah, if it suits us and lines my pocket, then I'll sell $200 million milk owned by the farmers for $2 million and get away with it. Our only defence is being removed.
Yeah, you can resume your seat, mate. Your time's finished.
Can resume your seat, mate. The time's finished. None of them are listening. Oh, we listened. We listened, Katter.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Wilkie.
For Clark. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Look, I'll start by acknowledging that I've been approached by quite a lot of people in the community, not just constituents, but in fact from right around
One of your boys, Luke, from Tassie?
Australia, who have expressed a broad range of concerns with this bill. So much so that I won't be supporting it. The sorts of concerns that have been raised by constituents, everything from concern that it's designed to push people into the clutches of the banks, so they have to engage in the banking system, concerns that it's a fundamental right, sorry, it's an attack on people's fundamental right to use cash. Also, an interesting line of argument, which I think has some merit, that if Australia does eventually reach negative interest rates, cash will assume a new importance, but this bill would diminish the ability of people to use cash. Deputy Speaker, I would add to these concerns what is perhaps the biggest concern to me personally, and that it's simply not necessary. It's theatre by a government that is trying to be seen to be doing something about the issue of money laundering by introducing into this place a bill to do something which we just don't need. Because at the moment, as all members would know, there's already a requirement to report transactions over $10,000. So that and the other laws of the land, for example the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Act of 2006, the Financial Transaction Reports Act 1988, the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Rules Instrument 2007 No. 1, and the Financial Transaction Reports Regulations of 1990. In other words, we have an abundance of laws to do with money laundering and the black economy. Deputy Speaker, the problem is those laws are not being implemented and enforced. That's the problem. That's what the government and the opposition should be focusing on, is the weak governance we have in this country and the weak enforcement and regulatory framework we have in this country. That's the reason the black economy exists. That's the reason money laundering occurs. In fact, it's because of that concern about weak governance and enforcement and regulatory agencies, Deputy Speaker. That's one of the reasons I've been so preoccupied with the Crown Casino crisis over the last couple of years. It's not that I have an unhealthy obsession with Crown Casino or James Packer. It's that I see the Crown crisis as an excellent case study which really illustrates the problems we have in this country and the problem that agencies are not doing their job. Why, just last week there was the remarkable video evidence provided by whistleblowers who are in fact casino inspectors inside the Victorian Commission for Gambling and Liquor Regulation, the unambiguous evidence of money laundering going on inside the private gaming rooms of Crown Casino. Who can forget the images from last week of three gentlemen, apparently that looked like they'd come in from overseas, with an Aldi freezer bag no less, with what we estimate to be over $3 million in cash. Where was Austrac? How can that be going on at Crown Casino? This isn't just about Crown now, this is about a question mark over Austrac. I mean, we all know that casinos attract trouble. We all know that casinos are just about the best place in the country to launder money. You would think then that the people who own and run the casino and the people that regulate the casino, like the VCGLR, the people who have a particular interest in money laundering, like Austrac, you'd think they would have a really keen eye on what's going on there. but obviously not. In fact, those whistleblowers, those gambling inspectors who have had to break ranks because the VCGLR is doing nothing about what's going on at Crown, they tell me that sort of scene, millions of dollars in an Aldi bag, that happens repeatedly in any 1 month. And in fact, I understand it was going on as recently as 7 weeks ago now.
Well, Labor love the Aldi bags too. Poor Aldi. I mean, I guess any publicity is good publicity, isn't it?
You would think that Austrac would have had a wake-up call. You would think that since last week Austrac would have got in touch with me and asked for the names and contact details of those two whistleblowers, but there's been silence. So I can only assume that Austrac, not only did they allow the money laundering to go on, but they don't have an interest in the unambiguous evidence that was made public last week. And it's not just Austrac too. You know, when you look at Crown, just about every agency I can think of has failed us. The Victorian Gambling Regulator, the VCGLR, it's their own inspectors who have had to turn whistleblower because the people who are running VCGLR are either dunderheads or they're corrupt. They're the only two options. They're dunderheads or they're corrupt. That's why the inspectors from inside the VCGLR have had to break ranks. What about Victorian Police? What are they doing about what's going on in Crown? Nothing. And I've been told by...
Do Victorian Police do everything? Anything?
Ex and serving Victorian police officers, they're told not to go to Crown, and they refer to Crown as the Vatican, a law unto itself. What about Border Force? Can we rely on them in Australia? No, because we now have a number of witnesses who have spoken up about flights coming in and out of Australia. First time they land is in Melbourne, and the aircraft aren't checked, the people on the aircraft aren't checked. We have one remarkable story from one whistleblower, a Crown driver, spoke about two Chinese gentlemen getting off the plane for a couple of days at Crown with 15 bags. Well, given the other evidence we cross-reference it with about the Aldi freezer bag with $3 million in it, I've got a sneaking suspicion I know what's in those 15 bags. Probably millions of dollars of cash, drugs, guns and who knows what else.
I know Kathy saw
doing about it? Nothing. ASIC. You would think ASIC would have a particular interest in what goes on at a place like Crown Casino. There's no evidence that they're doing anything about what's going on, even though it is an open secret, Deputy Speaker. It is an open secret that majority shareholder James Packer is in almost daily communications with the manager, the CEO of Crown. Now, what right does one shareholder in a company have to receive privileged information from the management of that casino? I'll take this opportunity, Deputy Speaker, to call on ASIC to look into that particular matter and the cosy relationship between James Packer and John Alexander in particular. And I call on ASIC to have a look at that relationship and to see if it is unlawful and whether or not John Alexander is providing privileged information to one shareholder, which information which is not being made available to other shareholders. What's the Australian Stock Exchange doing about this? The fact that it has...
Oh no, look, we've got one more person there. Yeah, it's a packed house, guys.
It has been deliberately misled by Crown Casino repeatedly.
You're right, he is playing on his phone. He needs to get on a keto diet too, mate. Come on, cut down the carbs in Parliament.
I'd remind you, Deputy Speaker, about 2 years ago in this place I made a number of allegations about Crown Casino, and in response Crown Casino put out full-page ads in the national papers in which it rebutted all allegations, and John Alexander put his name to it. Of course, afterwards, Crown was found to be guilty of two of the offences that I had made as allegations, and in fact Crown was fined $300,000. What has the ASX done about the fact that it was misled by Crown Casino, and was misled again just recently when 60 Minutes and 9 newspapers ran their expose of Crown, and Crown again put out full-page ads in the newspaper rebutting unambiguous claims of wrongdoing at Crown. That's at least twice that we can think of off the top of our head, Deputy Speaker, where Crown has misled the stock exchange and the stock exchange has done nothing about it. So what other opportunities are there? What other mechanisms are there in this country, Deputy Speaker? When you've got AUSTRAC, fail, VCGLR, fail, VicPol, fail, Border Force, fail, ASIC, fail, ASX, fail. Who can the community turn to, Deputy Speaker? Well, you'd think the community could turn to their politicians, to their representatives, for us to do something. So let's look at our track record, Deputy Speaker. When all the allegations in 9 newspapers and 60 Minutes aired recently, a couple of months ago it was, I think, I sought, in this place, I sought to move a motion that would establish a parliamentary inquiry into the corruption at Crown and the failure of our regulatory agencies and the unhealthy relationship between Crown and politicians serving and former. And what did this place do? Voted it down. Just when the public most needed their political representatives to come to their aid, to do something, to sort of mess out, you all choked. The government and the opposition voted against the parliamentary inquiry. Just last week, in response to the remarkable video evidence of money laundering at Crown Casino and other evidence that I released last week from a driver who was picking up these people from these black flights at Tullamarine private jet base, I sought to move a motion in this place to establish a Royal Commission. What happened? Voted down again. What does the government and what does the opposition have to hide, Deputy Speaker? Because if they've got nothing to hide, they would have no objection to a parliamentary inquiry. They'd have no objection to a Royal Commission. And a Royal Commission it needs to be. It's no good having this unnecessary bill today where we're going to make cash transactions over $10,000 illegal.
Making a really good point, isn't he?
There's no point doing things like that when we have much bigger and much deeper problems.
Yep.
What does the government and the opposition have to hide? Is it the amount of political donations you get from people like Crown Casino who are deeply corrupt? Is it to protect your mates like Conroy, Coonan, Batar, who are now associated with Crown Casino? What's going on here? If you've got nothing to hide, you should have supported the parliamentary inquiry and you should have supported the move for a Royal Commission. Deputy Speaker, I'm talking a lot about Crown Casino here to do with this cash bill, but I think it's the best example I can find to illustrate the fact that the problem in this country is not a lack of regulation when it comes to misconduct and money laundering in particular.
Yes.
It's the fact that our politicians are not doing their job. Our enforcement agencies are not doing their job. Our regulatory bodies are not doing their job. If we want to do something to improve this country and crack down on money laundering, then what we should be doing is having a proper inquiry into what's going on and make these agencies do their job. And I take the opportunity, Deputy Speaker, to also point out the Victorian government could do the same. I mean, it's become a high farce, the behaviour of the Victorian gaming minister, who reckons the VCGLR is doing a great job.
Wilkie.
Great job. At the same time, she's saying that at the same time that VCGLR inspectors have turned whistleblower, releasing evidence from Crown's own security cameras because their bosses in the VCGLR are either corrupt or they're dunderheads. And you've got the Victorian gaming minister saying, I have all the faith in the world in the VCGLR. And Daniel Andrews is...
You know, I remember when there wasn't any gambling in Victoria. When I was a kid, we'd come up to Queensland to go to the casino here. My parents would do that and gamble. None of it in Victoria. Remember that? Maybe I'm just showing my age.
See any hope? No. Useless. Nothing to say. Nothing to say. Move on. Further proof of this bizarre and at least legal corruption in the relationship between Crown Casino and the gambling industry and the political establishment. It reminds me, Deputy Speaker, that heavens, don't we need an integrity commission in this country? An independent, strong integrity commission with teeth. They could look into all of these issues. Unfortunately, the Attorney-General and I are going to have to continue to disagree with his decision to appoint the Australian Commission on Law Enforcement Integrity, ACLI, to look into the Crown crisis. I've got a lot of time for ACLI as far as its remit goes, and I wish it well in its current inquiries into Crown. But I note when I looked at their website just yesterday, the public hearings that are being held in Melbourne about Crown next week by ACLI are only to look into Border Force. No one's looking into AUSTRAC. I mean, as we're talking about money laundering today, I hope we would agree AUSTRAC is central to dealing with money laundering. And there's a huge question mark over AUSTRAC. Surely there has to be the most robust inquiry into AUSTRAC. And all these other federal organisations, Border Force, ASEC, well, that's a company, but they should be looked at as well. Deputy Speaker, I won't be supporting this bill. It is entirely unnecessary. It is an unhealthy distraction from the reality, which is that our problems are not an absence of money laundering rules and regulations. The problem in this country is that we have weak governance, politicians who want to hide from the truth and from scrutiny, and just about every agency I can think of that's related to money laundering at the federal level and in Victoria at the state level, they're useless when it comes to money laundering. In fact, by some estimates, less than 1% of money from crime is intercepted in this country. And no wonder when you can have an allegation like money laundering last week and AUSTRAC have not even given me a call and asked for the name of the witnesses.
That's why I think it's about tax. That's why I think it's about getting more tax, squeezing blood out of the stone. It's just going to capture the money from honest people.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for Clark. The question is the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have several strong reservations about this bill. More than any other bill, this bill exemplifies the nanny state that this government pretends it has not become. Restricting people's ability to purchase products with cash and forcing them to use banks or other financial intermediaries for purchases over $10,000 is an unreasonable restriction on their personal freedoms. I know that cash can be a vehicle for money laundering, but it is grossly unfair to label everyone who pays in cash as a criminal. I know that the government has a role to be diligent against money laundering, but this has not stopped them from political inaction on the allegations of money laundering levelled at Crown Casino. And the government was remarkably low-key in its commentary when the Commonwealth Bank of Australia was found to have failed to report more than 53,000 transactions of $10,000 or more through its supposedly intelligent depositing machines. And that for a period of 3 years, the Commonwealth Bank also failed to do its required red flag checks on transactions on over 750,000 bank accounts. Now, let's be clear. As a member for Clark says,
I think that's the next stage.
We have AUSTRAC, the Australian Transaction Report and Analysis Centre, a federal government department that's funded to the tune of $100 million in the 1920 budget. Now, they are there purely to track money laundering. They are there purely to look at criminal transactions related to money. And as the member for Clark says, what is happening with AUSTRAC? What is happening on the topic of banks? The other reason that I really struggle with this bill is that bank branches are being ripped out of rural and regional communities at a rapid rate of knots. I mean, where do you suppose we go to bank this? We just do not have the access to banking and financial services like we used to. And not everyone was born into the digital generation. Older Australians facing the digital divide and who do not live in a metropolis, who do not live in a CBD, will be seriously disadvantaged by this bill. In just the last few years in Mayo, our electorate has lost an ANZ at Goolwa, an ANZ at Lobethal, the Commonwealth Bank of Stirling, Commonwealth Bank of Strathalbyn. And if you go back a few more years, the number almost doubles. And there's not even a bank in Harndorf, and that's our busiest tourist town in South Australia. In some communities...
Did you all see in the paper that Adelaide is the meth capital of Australia? South Australia's got a lot of problems.
Cash can genuinely be the only option. How many elderly people who sell their second-hand car will have an FPOS machine and a Wi-Fi connection able to do the transaction? We're just not serious. I mean, clearly, nobody from the government side's attended a clearing sale lately. Exactly, the banks have taken away our chequebooks. They've done everything possible to remove cheque accounts. So we are really disadvantaging regional and rural Australians with this bill. This bill not only has a strict liability offence for making a cash transaction for over $10,000, but also a mental element offence for doing so. And yet the mental element defence only looks at whether the person knew that there was a real risk that the payment would, in essence, result in them committing the strict liability offence, not whether the person actually intended to make the cash payment for some nefarious purpose. We are focusing on criminalising their knowledge of risk rather than focusing on criminalising black economy activities that we actually want to stop. Now, if we want to address money laundering, if we're really serious about this, we need to look at the gambling industry. We have footage. We know that that is where money gets washed. We had a vote in this place last week and both the major parties had no interest at all. Saw the footage, had no interest at all. Another issue that's been raised...
It really seems like the major parties don't give a crap about the people anymore, doesn't it? It really does. Stuart sent me the headline from the paper down in Newcastle, where One Nation is bringing attention to the issues in the mining sector down there. Yeah.
With me by many people is that, we have all-time low interest rates, and we don't know. I heard this morning on AM we don't know if the interest rates are going to go further than the 0.75% that they currently are. Now, we can look at international examples. The Bank of Japan adopted a negative interest rate in January 2016, essentially meaning it cost people with savings money to have their money in the bank. It costs them money to have it in the bank. But what we're doing with this is we're not providing them with any other alternative. And that is just plain wrong. And so while Centre Alliance will reserve its position in the Senate until the Senate inquiry into the bill concludes, on the basis of the information currently available and the level of concern, very real concern in my community, particularly from older members of my community, about this bill, knowing that I am truly representing a regional and rural community where the banks have left us, I cannot support this bill in the House. Thank you.
May I thank the member for Mayo. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. And firstly, I'd like to thank those members who've contributed to this important debate. In the 2018-19 budget, the government responded to the Black Economy Task Force's final report by announcing measures to address the growing economic and social problem of the black economy. This bill establishes the cash payment limit and introduces offences for entities that make or accept cash payments of $10,000 or more. It does not apply to personal or private transactions other than real property transactions. There is an increased possibility that participants of a transaction involving large cash payments are doing so to either reduce their tax bill by underreporting their taxable income, avoiding other obligations such as child support payments, engaging in welfare fraud or other criminal activities. It will help the playing field for honest businesses that do the right thing and remove the notion that acting in the black economy is a victimless crime. I commend the bill to the House.
I thank the Minister. The original question was that this bill be now read a second time. To this, the honourable member for Whitlam has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view of substituting other words. The question is that the amendments be agreed to. All those opinions say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The clerk.
The noes have it.
There was no noes. There was no voices. If no one speaks, then that means that there's no voices. So the ayes have it.
The noes have it.
Do you want me to put it again, and this time perhaps you could do it? The question is that the amendments be agreed to. All those opinions say aye. Contrary, no. No. The noes have it. The noes have division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes.
Look at that, guys. Look at that. Look at the chamber. Okay, now watch what happens. Watch what happens. And what were they all doing? What were they all doing? Were they hanging out, you know, having drinks or smoko? Here we go. Verizon reckons they're all texting outside.
I think if you think it's after is because you got to vote.
Here we go, they're coming. Fast breath, there's a vote on. The pub just closed in Parliament, is it? You might be right, Crunchy. You might be right. Or what they listen to the debate. Mark, probably because they have to do what the party tells them to do. Blake's asking how many of them are fat. I don't know, mate. I don't know. I think being fit and healthy is politics. I guess a lot of them just come in under the party name. They just come in under the party.
Order. The original question was this bill be now read a second time. To this, the honourable member for Whitlam has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting other words. So the immediate question is that the amendment moved by the member for Whitlam be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Lawler and Werriwa tell us for the ayes, and the honourable members for Nichols and Gray tell us for the noes.
Yeah, I'd agree. Otherwise, shift the window, mate. Mix up Parliament. Yeah, well. She's asking if I've looked into Agenda 2030. No, I haven't. I have not. Wants to move to Germany, yeah. Maybe Poland, mate. Poland. They run out of free truffles. Probably did. Everyone has to listen to the truffle song. Maybe the potato is taken care of. I mean, just look at the difference. Look how full the chamber is now. Ben's only so interesting to people that they put something up. We've only got about another 5 minutes of this, guys. Hey Dale, just doing the final vote now. It's not looking good. Some good speeches. That's good. Horizon's asking what to talk about. We're traitors. Yeah, maybe. What are you going to spend your huge super money on? How many flights are you flying? Are you getting all these properties and things? Yeah, that was a mistake, guys.
Order. The result of the division is ayes 66, noes 75. The question is therefore resolved in the negative. The question now is that this bill be read a second time. All those of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. 2 voices, yes. Ring the bell. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute.
Watch this.
But the tellers will potentially be doing a full count.
Watch the division. Yeah, Tom, I'm watching. Oh, my voice is quiet. You can't hear me. The sound. I need to up it. Is that better?
Remind members it's a 1 minute division.
Right, the voting.
I remind members it's a 1 minute division.
Then it's passed.
I'll be counting people on either side.
Watch. These are the good guys.
Lock the doors.
Everyone
As there
here?
are fewer than 5 members on the side for the noes in this division, I declare the question resolved in the affirmative in accordance with Standing Order 127. The names of those members who are in the minority will be recorded in the votes and proceedings. I call the clerk.
Okay, is that better? How's the noise there?
Second reading, a bill for an act to restrict the use of cash in transactions and for related purposes.
Is leave granted for the third reading to be moved immediately? The member for Brand.
Leave is granted.
The Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I move the bill now be read a third time.
Question is the bill be now read a third time. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
There you go. Third time reading. It's gone through.
The clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act to restrict the use of cash in transactions and for related purposes.
That's it. They're all leaving, guys. There you go. Done. So, thanks for joining me to watch this. Yeah, I mean, it's good to see what those who raised objections and had issues with it said in Parliament. You know, learn something new from good old Katter. But just how empty it was. You know, Wilkie was good too. But yeah, there you go. So guys, thank you all very much for joining me for this. I now have to, I'm going to the airport to pick my mother up. She's back from Austria, arriving in an hour. So, take care everyone. I will see you all tomorrow. And, yeah, have fun. And make sure to make your submissions to the Senate. There's still a chance, guys. That, you know, if it has to get through the Senate, there's still a chance. Okay? Still a chance. It's kind of sad, though, that... Kind of sad when you look at this. Oh. At this. Innit? Anyway, guys, take care, and I'll see you later.